The castle of Blackthorn Pack stood on a hill above the pines, its stone walls gray and cold against the morning sky. Inside, the halls were quiet, for the Alpha King Damian Kane did not like noise. He had not liked much of anything since the night his mate disappeared, 5 years ago, taken in a raid that left half his warriors dead and his heart empty. Damian ruled with a strong hand and a closed heart. His advisors said he was fair but distant, kind to his people but cold to himself. He had never taken another mate, though many hoped he would. He simply worked, trained his warriors, and stared out at the forest at night, as if waiting for someone who was never coming back. It was on an ordinary morning that a new servant arrived at the castle. Her name, the head housekeeper said, was Alara. She was thin, with tired eyes and quick hands, and she did not speak a single word. Not to greet the staff, not to answer questions, not even to cry out when she burned her hand on a hot pan in the kitchen. She simply nodded, bowed her head, and worked. The other servants whispered about her. Some said she had been born without a voice. Others said something terrible had happened to her, and she had chosen silence over speaking of it. Alara let them whisper. She had learned, a long time ago, that silence kept her safe. She did not know, not fully, why she flinched at loud noises, or why the smell of pine and smoke sometimes made her chest tighten with fear she could not explain. Her memories before 3 years ago were broken, like a mirror dropped on stone. She remembered running through a forest. She remembered pain. She remembered a voice calling a name that was not quite her own, though something in her had always ached when she tried to recall it. She had wandered from town to town since then, taking small jobs, never staying long enough for anyone to ask too many questions. When she heard the Blackthorn Pack castle needed kitchen help, she had come without much thought. She needed food and a roof, nothing more. Damian noticed her on her 3rd day. He was walking through the lower halls, his mind on trade routes and border patrols, when he passed the kitchen doorway and saw a young woman carrying a tray of bread. She stopped when she saw him, as all servants did, and lowered her eyes respectfully. But something made him pause. It was not her face, though it was pleasant enough. It was something underneath his skin, a pull he had not felt in 5 years, a strange tightening in his chest, as though some part of him recognized her before his mind could catch up. He told himself it was nothing. Grief could make a man imagine things. But the feeling did not go away. Over the following weeks, Damian found himself walking past the kitchens more often than his duties required. He watched Alara from a distance, the way she moved carefully but purposefully, the way her eyes would sometimes drift toward the forest outside the window with a look of quiet longing. One evening, he asked the head housekeeper why the new girl never spoke. "She cannot, my lord, or she will not," the housekeeper said. "We have never heard her voice. She is a hard worker, though, never complains, never causes trouble." Damian nodded slowly. That night, he could not stop thinking about her silence, about the sadness in her eyes that seemed too deep for an ordinary servant girl. He began finding reasons to speak with her, though she could not answer. He would ask if the kitchen needed anything, and she would write her answers on a small slate she kept at her belt. Her handwriting was neat, careful, like someone who had once been taught with patience and care. This surprised him. Most kitchen maids could not write at all. Slowly, without meaning to, Damian began to care for her comfort. He ordered that she be given warmer blankets for the servant quarters. He noticed when she looked tired, and told the housekeeper to give her lighter duties. He told himself he was simply a fair ruler, looking after his people. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. His advisors grew concerned. An alpha king, doting on a mute kitchen maid was not proper, they said. He needed to think of the pack's future, of alliances, of a proper Luna to stand beside him. Damian brushed off their words, though he could not explain, even to himself, why he found it so hard to stay away from her. One cold evening, Damian found Alara alone in the castle garden, sitting beneath an old oak tree, staring at the moon. She startled when she saw him, quickly rising to bow, but he raised a hand to stop her. "Sit," he said gently. "I am not here to scold you." She hesitated, then sat back down, her eyes wary but not afraid. Damian sat beside her, close enough to speak quietly, far enough to give her space. You remind me of someone, he said softly, more to himself than to her. I do not know why. I have not felt this way in a long time. Ilara looked at him, and for a moment, something flickered behind her eyes, something like recognition, though she could not name it. She reached for her slate and wrote a single word. Why? Damien looked away, toward the moon. I lost someone, he admitted. 5 years ago. My mate. She was taken from me in a raid, and I never found her again. I stopped hoping, after a while. It was easier than grieving every single day. Ilara's hand trembled slightly as she wrote again. I am sorry. You do not need to be sorry, Damien said. It is not your burden to carry. He studied her face in the moonlight, and again felt that strange pull, as though his body knew something his mind refused to accept. Do you remember your past at all, before you came here? Ilara shook her head slowly, then hesitated, and wrote, broken pieces. Forest, fire, a voice calling my name, but I cannot remember the name. Damien's heart clenched at her words, though he did not know why. He wanted to ask more, but he saw the fear returning to her eyes, and he did not wish to frighten her. Instead, he simply sat with her in silence, the two of them watching the moon together, until the cold drove them both back inside. After that night, something shifted between them. Ilara no longer avoided his gaze. She would linger near him when he passed, and he found excuses to visit the kitchens more often. The castle staff began to notice, and the whispers grew louder, though neither Damien nor Ilara paid them much attention. Weeks passed like this, quiet and gentle, until the night everything changed. It began with the sound of the alarm bell ringing through the castle, urgent and sharp. Warriors from a rival pack, the Ashfall, had broken through the outer gates, seeking to finish what they had started 5 years before, when they had raided Blackthorn territory and taken the King's Maid as leverage in a war that never ended the way they wanted. Damien rushed to the front lines, his warriors gathering around him, but chaos had already spread through the castle halls. Servants ran for safety, and in the confusion, a group of Ashfall fighters broke into the lower halls, straight toward the kitchens, where Ilara stood frozen with fear. One of the attackers grabbed her, dragging her toward the courtyard, shouting words she did not understand at first, words about a debt owed, about a king who needed to pay for what his pack had done. Something inside Ilara snapped. Memories, long buried, came rushing back all at once. The forest. The fire, the pain of a ritual, meant to strip her of her wolf and her voice, to erase who she was, so she could never return to claim her place. She remembered running, bleeding, escaping into the dark, her mind shattering under the weight of what had been done to her. And she remembered a name, his name. As the attacker raised his hand against her, something powerful stirred within Ilara, a strength she had long forgotten. Her wolf, suppressed for years by dark magic, broke free at last. Her eyes glowed gold, and with a burst of force she did not know she still possessed, she threw the attacker back, sending him crashing into the courtyard wall. Damien, fighting nearby, turned at the sound of the commotion and saw her standing tall for the first time, her wolf's power radiating around her like a shield of light. And then, for the first time in 5 years, he heard her voice. Damien! The sound of his name, spoken in the voice he had longed to hear again for so long, stopped him cold. It was her. It had always been her. The scent that had confused him, the pull he could not explain, the ache in his chest whenever she was near, all of it made sense now. His lost mate had not died in the raid. She had survived, broken and hidden, stripped of her voice and her memories, and fate had brought her back to him as a silent servant, waiting for the moment she was strong enough to remember who she truly was. With new strength fueled by both fury and love, Damien fought his way to her side, and together, king and mate, they drove back the Ashfall attackers until the remaining warriors fled into the night, defeated. In the aftermath, as the castle healers tended to the wounded, Damien knelt before Ilara, his hands cupping her face gently, as though she might disappear if he let go. It was you, he whispered. All this time, it was you. Tears filled her eyes as she nodded, her voice still trembling from years of silence. I did not know, she said softly. I could not remember. I am sorry I could not tell you. You have nothing to apologize for, Damien said fiercely. I should have protected you. I should have found you sooner. You found me when it mattered, Elara replied, her voice growing steadier with each word. You cared for me before you even knew who I was. That is enough. In the days that followed, the castle healers worked with the pack's oldest wolves to fully break the ritual that had bound Elara's memories and her wolf for so long. Slowly, piece by piece, her past returned to her, painful, but whole. She remembered her childhood in Blackthorn territory, her bond with Damien before the raid, and the love they had shared before it was so cruelly taken from them. Damien never left her side during her healing, holding her hand through the difficult nights, reminding her softly of who she was, whenever the memories grew too heavy to bear alone. And slowly, the silent maid who had once hidden in the shadows of the castle kitchens became, once again, the strong and loving mate the Alpha King had never stopped searching for. On a bright morning, with the whole pack gathered in the courtyard, Damien stood beside Elara on the castle balcony. The pack watched in stunned silence as their king took her hand and spoke the words they had waited 5 long years to hear. This is Elara, he announced, his voice carrying across the crowd. My mate, taken from me in the Ashfall raid, and returned to me by fate itself. She stands before you today, not as a servant, but as your Luna, the true queen of Blackthorn Pack. A moment of stunned silence passed, and then the courtyard erupted into howls of joy, the pack celebrating the return of the Luna they had lost, and never truly forgotten. Elara looked out over the crowd, tears of happiness in her eyes, her voice, once silenced by fear and dark magic, now ringing out clear and strong as she greeted her people for the first time. Damien pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers, the two of them finally whole after years of pain and searching. I never stopped waiting for you, he whispered, even when I told myself to give up hope. I am here now, Elara said softly, her hand resting against his chest, over the heart that had beaten for her, even when he did not know her name, and I am never leaving again. Below them, the pack howled into the morning sky, celebrating not just the return of their Luna, but the healing of their king's long-broken heart. The castle of Blackthorn, once quiet and cold, now echoed with warmth and hope, as its king and queen stood together, ready to build a future neither of them had dared to dream of during the years they had spent apart. And as the sun rose fully over the pines, casting golden light across the courtyard, Damien and Elara faced their people together, no longer a silent maid and a grieving king, but a mated pair whose bond had survived fire, silence, and time itself, stronger for everything it had endured.